Welcome back with another video on my channel, this time maybe a bit more slightly negative video than as usual on my channel, where I like to talk about artists I like. Today is also about artists I like, but it's about albums that I think are overrated or albums that I just can get into as others by artists I like. So I'm kind of a fan of all those artists, but these are albums that other fans of those artists think of very highly, and I never could get into them. You know, it would be, in my opinion, a bit a pointless video to just make a video about overrated albums and include artists I don't like, because you know it would be very easy to make a video about praised albums by acts like AC/DC or Guns N' Roses or something like that, because I just don't like those groups. You know, it's very easy for you to find albums that you don't like, but it's a bit more tough to find albums that you don't like by artists that you like. So first off, honorable mention. It's an honorable mention because I'm not really a fan of this group, so it's on the verge, on the borderline between, do I even like this artist? But I like some of their work, even some of their work on this album. It's the Joshua Tree by U2. You know, I can't have them in the top 10 because, as I said, I'm not really a U2 fan, but I like some of their stuff. For example, I prefer this album, Unforgettable Fire, which was the album before Joshua Tree, to the Joshua Tree. But the Joshua Tree is the big album, you know, the big seller, and often U2 fans will say this is the best album. I also very much prefer lots of the 90s work of U2, like Achtung Baby, or maybe even more controversial, the album that no one seems to like except me, which was called Pop from 1997. But Joshua Tree, I was never really a big fan of Joshua Tree, although some of the, especially the single hits, of course, are classics, like With or Without You. But for example, I never could really get into I Still Haven't Found What I'm Looking For, or Where the Streets Have No Name. It's not my type of stuff. Maybe it's a bit too bombastic for me liking it. So that's the honorable mention, or dishonorable mention, because like I said, I'm not really a fan of U2, and this video should be about artists that I really like and where I don't agree with the consensus on some of their most highly regarded albums. Number 10. That's not even really controversial anymore, because there are so many people have come out in recent years saying that this is one of the more overrated albums in pop history. Pet Sounds by Beach Boys, the Beach Boys. I agree. It's not my favorite Beach Boys album. I prefer, for example, Sunflower, Surf's Up, and Smiley Smile even. So there's at least 3 albums I would listen to rather before I'd listen to Pet Sounds, and also some of the work from before Pet Sounds, you know. They did fantastic. I think 2 albums in 1965. I think I would say both of those 1965, or was one in 1964. Both of those albums I prefer to Pet Sounds, or I think at least are as good. So I never could see why this was seen as the big step forward, and like this is 100 times better than anything they did before, because I think it's about as good as the things they did before. The only difference is this album is maybe more sad and more whiny than the albums before, but I prefer the Beach Boys to be glorious and happy and joyful. So Pet Sounds, although it has some great songs, of course, but I never could see it as one of the big pop masterpieces of all time. The next one is 1999 by Prince. I have it in this deluxe edition, and you know, listening to it as a deluxe box set with all the extras and archive material, live performances, etc. It's really nice to listen to it, so I enjoy this version of it. But the album itself, which was a double album, at least on vinyl when it came out in 1982, isn't even in my top 5 favorite Prince albums. It's nice. It has 2, the big hits, the 2 big hits on that album 1999 and what's the other one? Little Red Corvette. Those are my two favorite songs, and I would say those are some of my favorite Prince songs. But the album, all in all, I don't like it as much as, for example, Around the World in a Day or Purple Rain, Sign of the Times, or even before that album, Dirty Mind, for example. Something is missing for me on this. Maybe it's a bit too. It's a double album, so it should be really eclectic, and it's a Prince double album, so it should be really really eclectic. But to me, it sounds strangely one-dimensional. It's more the party side of Prince, which is okay, but a double album just with those kind of songs, never my favorite Prince album. Number 8 is the big comeback, the artistic comeback, as it was called, of Bob Dylan, Time Out of Mind, from I think 1997. I much prefer the bootleg series, which covers this period, which is called Telltale Signs. With Bob Dylan, you often get it that the unreleased material, which would later turn up on bootleg series, is very different than the released material, and often better than the released material. And in this case, I really prefer those alternate versions of those songs. It was really hailed as a reinvention and a big comeback, but the way he reinvented himself with this album, and after that all those albums were, almost all his albums were in this style, this very dry blues, acoustic blues sound. That's not really what I'm looking for with a Bob Dylan album. It has its merits, of course. All those albums, I can see why some people like those albums, but usually it's that objectively I can see that those are good or maybe even great albums, but I like those albums for other reasons than what these albums really put their focus on. And this is a bit too dry and minimalistic for me, liking it that much. The next one is this is a solo Beatles album. It's George Harrison's Cloud 9. I already did on my channel various videos where I ranked all the Beatles and Beatles solo albums, George Harrison albums ranked, and even I did a video, the most overrated Beatles solo albums. And in this video I had 4 albums, one, in my opinion, overrated solo album for each Beatle, and George was Cloud 9. Again, I like it, but the album before that, Gone Troppo, was seen as a big flop, not just commercially, but also artistically. People said he's totally burned out, he hasn't any new ideas anymore. And I quite enjoy Gone Troppo. I think Gone Troppo is about as good as this, maybe this is slightly better, but I never could see why this was hailed as such a big masterpiece in George's career and a comeback, and Gone Troppo wasn't, because I think the things I like or dislike about both albums are quite similar. And what I prefer about Gone Troppo to this album is that Gone Troppo doesn't really try to be a big statement, a big comeback. It's a very laid back album, and I like George Harrison, especially solo, most when he's laid back and more happy. This is really sounding like a professional album, like he really wanted to have a big chart success, and that's not really George, in my opinion. But I respect it. But prefer maybe I prefer even Gone Troppo to it, and especially the albums before that I prefer very much to it. Number 6 is Tommy by The Who. I talked about The Who in one of my recent videos, where I also said that I didn't really enjoy The Who Sell Out, which is also nowadays seen as a big achievement by The Who and a masterpiece. Many fans, especially fans of the pre-rock opera era, love The Who Sell Out. This is the rock opera era. I think I slightly prefer The Who Sell Out to Tommy, but so this is much more hyped even nowadays, where The Who Sell Out is seen much more fondly than like when it came out. But even nowadays, Tommy is the big album. The Who's Next, Tommy, Quadrophenia, those are seen as the big Who masterpieces. you know, like I said in that video a couple of weeks ago, I really love The Who as a singles band, and I've never seen them live, but I imagine them to be one of the best, most spectacular live bands of all time when they were in their heyday. But I was never really a fan of any The Who album, and that includes Tommy. Has its moments, but maybe a bit too over ambitious for me liking it. You know, I like to have, I prefer, I think, albums that really don't try that hard to be something special. Next album is my number 5. And sorry, Eddie, if you're watching it. You did a video about the Ditch trilogy by Neil Young. I'm also very fond of this phase in Neil Young's career, mid-70s, not after the gold, also after the Gold Rush, but after Harvest. And one of the key albums of that phase is On the Beach, but that's the album of that era, of that Ditch era, that I like the least. I think, you know, I don't really have much to say about this album. I always find it a bit boring, you know, monotonous, and also those long acoustic, it's like Time Out of Mind, those long acoustic blues, those very minimalistic acoustic blues numbers, you know, they don't really work for me. It's not my type of music, I would say. Number 4, that's very controversial, and this is, you know, all those albums before I like, but I don't hate any of these albums. The next album is an album that I really, really like, which is, it's really a very good album, and by any other artist I would say it's a brilliant album, but this artist is, you know, such a big artist to me, and this is from his classic phase, and from his classic phase it's often regarded as one of the 2 or 3 best albums from his classic phase, which lasted from like 1969 to 1976. He made like 7 or 8 albums in that phase, and the album I'm going to talk about is usually number 1, 2 or 3 for fans of this artist, and this artist is Stevie Wonder. Talking Book. Talking Book is probably my least favorite Stevie Wonder album from that phase, from like 1968 to 1976. I like it. Like I said, it's really if those other albums by him wouldn't exist, I would say this is a masterpiece and one of Stevie Wonder's best, if not the best album. But I prefer from the 70s the albums Music on My Mind, Fulfillingness's First Finale, Inner Visions, and especially Songs in the Key of Life, which is one of my all-time favorite albums. It's a great album, but maybe slightly overrated. The next one is number 3. We're already at number 3. Led Zeppelin 4. What can I say about this album? It's maybe one of the most successful albums of all time. Sold, I don't know, maybe 40 or 50 million copies. Stairway to Heaven is maybe one of the most well-known songs in history, and I like Stairway to Heaven, but I think if you listen to that album as a complete album, I never could see why this is, I couldn't even see why this should be the best, would be the best album by Led Zeppelin. There's at least 3, if not 4 Led Zeppelin albums I prefer. Physical Graffiti, Houses of the Holy, Led Zeppelin 2, I prefer all those albums to it. It's fine, but I think it's really too much hype about this album, even today. Number 2 is Some Girls by Rolling Stones. Now, this is really, I think, controversial to many Stones fans. Again, the comeback thing, people said that the Stones had a dry spell after Exile on Main Street, and this was the return to form. I totally disagree. I think that Goat's Head Soup is one of the best Stones albums ever. I also enjoy Black and Blue and It's Only Rock and Roll. To me, this is the opposite of the return to form. This is when they lose their form and never really get it back again. You know, I'm a big fan of the Tattoo You album, but that was an album composed of leftovers. Also, many leftovers from this album. You know, if they had some of those leftovers that got out on Tattoo You on this album, I would very much prefer this album. But you know, except Tattoo You, I think with this, starting with this and after that, they never really had a good album. Again, of course, Miss You is a great song, and Beast of Burden also, but you know, the rest I never could get into it. And also there's always this talk that you often get it with those overhyped albums, you know, like a catchphrase to say why this album is so great. And with this album it's usually the Stones being a punk band, and then on the other hand other people say this is the Stones being a disco band, and I think it's neither. You know, Miss You is maybe a bit disco-y, but it's not really a disco song, and 2 or 3 songs have a slightly punky sound, but it's not really a punk. You know, if you say this is a punk album, Back to the Akbar Wings is even much more a punk album than that. I think it's really a lazy Stones album with not many ideas, and yeah, for me it's the beginning of the end, basically. My number 2, and you know, the ranking is, you know, what is number 3, number 2, number 1. I ranked it according to how controversial those takes are. So I'm very aware that having Some Girls as an overrated album is very controversial. So that's why it's number 2. And number 1 is maybe the most controversial take of the whole video, because it's one of the albums Bowie fans or pop fans in general think of as one of Bowie's best albums. Some maybe have it as their favorite David Bowie album. You know, if I would rank the catalog of David Bowie, it wouldn't even be my top 15 albums probably. It's Scary Monsters, David Bowie. I never could get into that album. I really don't understand what's so good about that album. I think the albums before the Berlin trilogy basically were better, and I also think the album after that, the very successful Let's Dance, is a much better album. This is like a transitional record between the Berlin phase and the Let's Dance phase, and you know, I like the Let's Dance phase pure as Let's Dance, and the Berlin phase purely with those 3 albums. This is like an album that doesn't really know where to go, in my opinion. Ashes to Ashes is a brilliant song, of course, but apart from Ashes to Ashes, I never understood what the hype was about. So those were my top 10, not favorite albums, those are my top 10 overrated albums by artists that I like. Yeah, thank you very much for watching. Until next time, goodbye.